All right, well, man, I'm really glad you're here today. I do need to kind of warn you, if you weren't here last week or maybe you're brand new this week, we're in a very different message series for us. It's something, we've not done anything like this in the entire 8-year history of City North. And so it's a little bit different this week, and it'll be a little bit different the next couple weeks. And the reason for that is you may have noticed that there's big signs here that say go, and it says go real big up there. And there's this theme going on. What's happening is that we launched last week, for the first time that ever in our history, we launched a capital campaign. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's a thing that makes people nervous when churches do it and when pastors talk about it. Because what it means is that we're trying to raise money. And aren't you glad you came today now to hear about that? So here's the deal. I'm going to give a very quick recap of what Go is and why we're doing it. And then I'm going to stop talking about money. All right? We're not going to talk about money all day today. You don't need to worry about that. But what Go is, as a church, our board, our directional team, our kind of upper level leadership teams, have been walking through a very long journey over the last couple years, trying to figure out what our next steps are as a church. And what's become obvious is that God is preparing us, or God has put us in what I identified last week as a season of preparation. We don't know all the answers, and that's what we're going to talk about today, are the wheres and the whens. We don't have all the answers yet, but what we know is that God has put us in a season of preparation to secure a long-term future home for City North. This building we rent, we don't own it, and while that is tremendously positive in a lot of ways, it's also really challenging in a lot of ways. One very practical one, we desperately want to take the pews out of here and replace them with chairs. Because A, probably it would be a lot more comfortable, but B, it would allow us to flex the room and use it for different ministry purposes that we just can't use it for right now. But because we rent it, we can't do that. And that's fine. It's not our decision to make, but it creates challenges. And so it's a long story. It's a long road that's brought us to this place, but we know God has put us in a position now where it's time for us to prepare for something that's coming in the future. And so the Go campaign is a 3-year campaign to try to raise $250,000 to help secure a long-term future home for City North. And as I said last week, when I stand here right now and say that number, I'm like, oh, I don't want to say that number out loud, because then like it's locked in, and what happens if we don't get there? And I shared with our team earlier today that just in the interest of total full transparency, it scares me to death because I can't control it. And even though I'm a person who generally in my life is pretty okay with not being in control of things, my family might have words to say about that, but I think I'm pretty good at that. Even though I'm generally pretty good at that, it terrifies me in this case. But that's the goal. We feel like God led us to these numbers. He led us to this time, $250,000 over 3 years to help secure a long-term home for City North. Ultimately, though, what is so critical to me is that you understand from the jump that when I talk about that number, yes, there's a number, but the number is not what matters. The money is not what matters. What matters is the reason why we want to raise that amount of money. And the reason why is to continue doing what God has always been asking our church to do, and that is help lead people into life with Jesus. The number, the goal is ultimately not about having a bank account with X amount of dollars in it. It's about being able to secure a place that we can continue to meet the needs of our church and of this community. It's about securing a place where we can continue to help people find life in Jesus. People like Dave and Amy Nulter.
We grew up in an a cappella church, and very conservative and very, you didn't make a sound, you didn't move, women weren't allowed to talk in the church, we didn't celebrate holidays, so it was very just plain type worship.
My mom and dad divorced when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and she remarried my dad that I know now. That was the same kind of church that you went to, uber, ultra conservative, saying, put your heart into it, don't move. A lot of Bible knowledge, a lot of classes, but I think I was missing part of it. And then I moved to Columbus. I got a technology job in Columbus and started going to a church that was somewhat like that. That's where we met, actually. We moved to Sunbury and started going to Sunbury Christian for 10 to 12 years. And that's when we got to the point where I noticed that I was going to church by myself a lot.
I had some issues where I just was not able to be involved. Just seeing, different like groups of people sitting together, and it's like, I would love to have that. Just knowing that that was never going to be an option for me. And then I started getting anxiety for going to church. Like, I'd make myself, oh my gosh, I'm getting sick, or I can't do this. I'm going to throw up. I got to the point where I'm like, just go without me. Nobody reached out to me to see where I've been or anything, or ask, hey, how's Amy? No one checked in with me. And so I felt very hurt and very lonely.
We weren't together as a family, at church. That's just where we were at that point, and I wrestled with that a lot. How do I fix this? And the Lord doesn't always tell me exactly what to do to fix things, because I wouldn't listen in the first place. He always has to tell somebody else, so they get the picture. They're like, oh, wait a minute, we should be doing something else here. And then, hey, Dave, why don't we try a different church?
I had been watching you guys online. I'm like, let's just try it. And he's like, no. And I'm like, I don't want to go to a big church again. I'm like, let's go to try it out. And we walked in, and I'm like, this is our home. And I've never felt like the Spirit working so much in my life as I have when I've came here.
Agree.
And it's just like, it's something about just walking in to the atmosphere that you guys have set here. It's the expressions on people's faces when you walk through the door. I'm generally glad to see you. I mean, I walk through the door and I don't know how many people hug me, or say hi or ask how I'm doing. And from the moment we walked in the door, I felt loved.
It's not so much that Jesus is among us, he's more in us. You can tell that he's living inside the person that you're talking to.
Our lives are different today because of the people in our lives at City North. Our prayer life is better at home. We're happier as a family. The kids look forward to coming to church. They love small group.
Seeing our kids grow since we've been here, baptizing Johnny, getting Parker baptized, and even though Stephen wasn't baptized in this building, there was influence at camp and influence here that led to that decision.
The girls here are just amazing. We have our own little, chat, and
I walk by there, I think bling, 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 bling. I mean, the player can't keep up.
But we all know that we mean it, and we can laugh and have a good time. But we also know that we're here to pray for you. I have friends now that I can call. We've called people at 1 o'clock in the morning. They're on their knees praying right then. We've had people show up at our doorstep with food because they care about us. I just can't say enough because it's just an amazing place.
When I say the Go campaign isn't about money, it's because it's about that. It's about creating a place where that is happening. That's one story, and as I look around this room, I know so many stories. It's really humbling to me, the stories that I know of the ways that God has moved in many of your lives. We're not interested in $250,000. We're interested in seeing people find life in Jesus. I'm not interested in the money. I'm interested in helping people find life in Jesus. I'm interested in securing a long-term future so that we can see more stories like Dave and Amy's, and so that we can continue to bring people who feel lonely and hurt to the feet of the cross, where they can find healing and where they can find hope. That's what Go is all about. And so today and for the next couple weeks, we're going to talk about what this journey is going to look like. That's not even the right way to say that. We're going to talk about what these next few years are going to look like in terms of how we are going to operate, how we are going to handle this as a church family. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the big picture questions, and that's all going to lead up to October the 6th, which is the final week of this series and is the week where we are going to be taking up our first offering for the campaign, and where we're also going to be taking up our pledges for those 3 years. Now, if you're new to City North, if you aren't sure if this is home, you can ignore everything that I'm saying right now because this isn't for you. But if you're a part of City North, if this is your church family, that week is the week that we are going to celebrate a couple really incredible things. I've got a couple stories right now that I cannot share just yet, but I'm going to share some bits and pieces of. Let me just say that God has an incredible, incredible way of humbling your sense of needing to control situations. He has an incredible way of providing what you need as a reminder that he is in control of the things that he leads you to. And so I've got a couple stories to share in the coming weeks that I'm excited about. But on October the 6th, we are going to take our first offering as a church family for the Go campaign, and we are going to make our commitments. And again, if City North is home for you, I'm going to repeat what I said last week. And that is that ultimately, I don't want you to do anything other than pray. I just want you to talk to the Lord. And I want you to listen to whatever he says to you. And if what he says to you is, it is not the time for you to invest in this, then you obey that and you don't invest in it. Because ultimately you're following the Lord, you're not following me. And if the Lord says to you, I want you to invest a number that when you hear it from the Lord, you think, oh man, there's no way. Let me just tell you that I already told you that standing up here, $250,000 doesn't make sense, but the Lord has already reminded me through this journey that he is in control, not me. And so when he asks for a thing, just offer it, whatever it is, and he will remind you that he is sovereign. So that's where we're headed with this. Now, today, the road that's led to this has been very, very interesting. I shared parts of that story last week. I want to share another part today that's more recent. In the beginning of 2023, many of you know bits and pieces of this, but you may not know the full deal. At the beginning of 2023, our landlords approached us, and they told us that we were not going to be able to continue meeting in this facility in 2024. Now, it's 2024 and we're here, so obviously some things changed along the way. But at the time, that was very nerve-wracking information. So this is January of 23. We're like, okay, so we've got to kick our butts into gear. We got to make some changes. We got to do some things, and we got to get ready to move out of here. And we spent all of the calendar year of 2023 desperately searching for a new home. Now, for me, I was never super worried about it early on because there were a handful of us that were around early on in the journey and remember what it was like to be a portable church. We were portable for the first 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years, and I was confident that, worst case scenario, we could always just be portable again. We could go back into a school, we could get another box truck or a big trailer, like we can just go portable again. It's a ton of work, it's a lot of effort, but if we had to, we could do it. Until I talked to the district superintendent for Big Walnut Local Schools, and he was like, hey man, listen, I heard that you guys are thinking about making a proposal to us. It isn't gonna work. It's like, why not? Well, because we have this custodial shortage across the district and I can't staff it. It's like, oh. So like, you're saying like hard pass. Yeah, hard pass. Like I can't submit a proposal. No, it's gonna have to get rejected. Okay, so this is May. So there goes my backup plan. Now, some of you know me well, some of you don't know me at all. I don't plan stuff. I don't do that. Okay, so the fact that I had a plan and then I had a backup plan was remarkable. The fact that then my backup plan just went poof, was terrifying. Like, all right, no, it's okay. God's got our back. God's got us. God hasn't led us this far to let us down. And we keep looking. We're looking, and we meet with community leaders. We meet with people in Sunbury City government. We meet with pastors, and there's nothing. Just nothing. And then we're like, okay. I approached our board, and I said, okay, here's what I think we need to do, and this is crazy. Like I said this to the board, this is crazy, but I think what we need to do is we need to write a letter, and we need to send it to every church that is in the Big Walnut Local School District. And what we need to say is something to the effect of, here's our story, here's our journey. We're in a place now where we're looking for space to continue having Sunday morning services, and we don't know where we're going to go, but if you have any kind of a need, if you have any kind of space, if there's any way that you think maybe our journeys could intersect, reach out to us. And so we send the letter. We compile a list. We send the letter. My board, the board didn't tell me at the time, but a couple of them later on were like, yeah, I thought that was a pretty dumb idea. Like, yeah, I'm good at that. So a short time later, I get a call from our board secretary who's like, hey, so I got a call back on that letter. I'm like, really? Yeah, there's this church that this pastor called, and he kind of told me a bit of their story, and he wants to meet us. All right. So we go out and we meet this pastor, and the whole time leading into it, I'm just praying like, God, make it clear, like, make it clear if this is you or if this is not. Make it clear to me, make it clear to the team, just make it obvious. And for about 5 months, we pursued this lead hard. We developed a relationship with the pastor. We developed a relationship with the church. It was a really, really small church. Like I'm talking like 9 people left in the church. The pastor is way past typical retirement age. He hasn't taken a salary in years. He's killing himself. They can't keep up with their facilities. And he's like, we know that he said to me, we know we're 1 or 2 deaths away from closing our doors forever. And we just don't want to see all that we've done go to waste. And so we began negotiating what it might look like for us to partner with them, and we got deep into the process. And by the time October rolled around, we started meeting with their actual church at that point, not just the pastor, but with the actual church. And he and I sat down one day and we started to hammer out a lease, a 3-year lease. And this was the deal. The terms of the lease were going to be that we would assume primary responsibility for and control of the property itself, the buildings on the property, for 3 years. During that at the beginning of it, we were going to renovate an old building that was their old church building that had fallen into complete disrepair. We would renovate that with our money. That would be our primary meeting space. And then there was a building in the back, a newer metal building that they used at that point. We would be able to utilize that for kids' space when they weren't in there. And during that 3-year term, we would pay $0 a month in rent. But we would care for the property. And at the end of that 3 years, then we would just renegotiate. And I cannot overemphasize, at every step along the way, it was like God was laying out the most incredible story. And then a week before Thanksgiving in 2023, I called the pastor on a Monday, and I said, hey, just wanted to check in. And he said, well, Andrew, our church voted yesterday to kill the deal. It's over. And I said, you what? Like, we have until the end of December. Sunbury Christian has agreed to let us have January, but like technically the end of December is it's like November 18th or something. You what? And I said, what? You and I sat down a week and a half ago and we're laying out lease terms, and you were like, man, I feel so good about this. This is, it's going in a good direction. And he said there was something that you said the night that you met with our church that they couldn't get past. And they weren't comfortable, and so the deal's dead. I hung up the phone and just stood out in that lobby for a few minutes. Angry, just mad. I was angry with the pastor because I had developed a really good relationship with him, I thought, interpersonally. I felt betrayed, frankly. But then I was also very mad at God. Because in that moment, all I could see was, God, you led us down a 5-month rabbit hole that led nowhere. Like, we put all our eggs in this basket because you led us down this road. And now here we are. It is the week before Thanksgiving. I have to go tell our board this deal is dead. I've been like leaking little bits of information to the church to try to keep people excited about it because it seemed like everything was good, and now it's just gone. And we have no backup. Why would you do this to us? I don't know if you've ever been in a scenario where it appeared that God was opening a really great door, and then all of a sudden it just slams shut in your face. But there's something very different about recognizing, like when your plans fail, when my plans fail, it's a bummer. But it's a whole different animal when you are doing everything you can to humbly follow the Lord, and He leads you down a road that ends in disaster. And that's where I found myself Thanksgiving of 2023. Now, I've not talked extensively with our board about where they found themselves. They were all very encouraging to me, and they were like, it's okay, God's got this, and all the things that I had been reminding them all along, but I'm confident that many of them felt the same things that I did. Well, fast forward, about 2 weeks later, I got an email. No, I'm going to save that part of the story. We'll come back to that. The point is, when you've walked down that road, it's full of questions, it's full of emotions, it's full of a lot of pain. But ultimately what it does is it forces us into a position where we have to answer a really critical question, and that is, do I really trust that God knows what he's doing? Do I really trust that? Because it's easy to trust that God knows what he's doing when what he's doing makes sense to me. It's easy to trust that God knows what he's doing when it makes sense to you. It's easy to trust what God is doing when the road that he has you walking down is a road that's lit up all the way to the destination. But when the road is a road that all of a sudden he's leading you just one step at a time, and now you're at the edge of a cliff, that's a different animal altogether. The Bible has a lot to say about this, and in fact, I would probably argue that it is the critical question throughout. There are many examples that I could point to, but there's one that I think is going to be really important for us today. In the New Testament, there's a man named Paul, and if you don't know anything about Paul, he is one of the probably the two or three most important figures in the Bible not named Jesus. Paul was a very unique guy in that he grew up and was trained as a Jewish rabbi. Jesus was Jewish. Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, but when Jesus died and rose from the grave, he established kind of a new thing. It was connected very tightly to Judaism, but it was new because Jesus was the promised Messiah, the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. And so the Jewish people in Jerusalem at the time and in Israel at the time were very split on, is this guy really the Messiah or not? Well, Paul, growing up and being trained as a Jewish rabbi, did not believe Jesus was really the Messiah. In fact, he believed that Jesus was a false prophet who was doing damage to the name of God. And so Paul began to travel around and he was hunting down Christians, this brand new religion that at the time they called the Way. He was hunting down followers of the Way, followers of Jesus, and the best we can tell, he was killing them. And then, in a miraculous moment, Paul is traveling to a city called Damascus. And as he's traveling down the road, he's blinded by this bright light, and Jesus himself appears to Paul and says, "Why are you persecuting me?" And he gives Paul a new name, a new identity, and calls him to a new purpose in life. And that purpose in life is to, instead of persecuting the church, it's to now take the good news of Jesus, the gospel, and to give it to the world. Paul was the first missionary in the history of the world. And so he did that, and he was phenomenal at it. Paul went on 4 major missionary journeys that are detailed throughout the New Testament. Paul almost single-handedly is responsible for the spread of the news of Jesus to the entire Mediterranean rim in the first century. Like, unbelievably incredible guy. Brilliant writer, brilliant planner. And there's this one particular moment in the book of Acts. Paul had already been on one very successful missionary journey, and now he's preparing to go on a second. And he has a plan. He has a route. He knows where he wants to go, and biblical scholars are unified across the board that Paul was legitimately brilliant. Like, like a savant. And so Paul's journey, although we don't know all the ins and outs of the details, here's what I can promise you. It would have been well thought out, it would have been purposeful, and it would have been a really, really, really good plan. Because Paul didn't tend to do dumb stuff. He knew where he was going, and he knew why he was going there. And then in Acts 16, we find this really, really interesting detail. It says this: Paul and his companions traveled through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. So pause for just a moment. They're on this road through this region of Phrygia and Galatia. Now, I thought about putting a map up here, but it wouldn't have helped that much. When he says the province of Asia, that doesn't mean Asia as we know it today. There was a region in the ancient Near East that was known as Asia in this particular time, that the road Paul was on was heading north, and it would have been to the northwest. And the region of Asia was full of really important port cities. And so most scholars believe that what Paul wanted to do was go to these port cities and spread the news of Jesus, because what Paul knew is if I get to the port cities and I convert people there into followers of Jesus, then the name of Jesus will start to spread all over the place, because the ports are where everybody's traveling to and from. We don't know why, we don't know the details, but all we know is that in Paul's mind, the Holy Spirit prevented him from going there. And then he continues. He says, Luke is writing this. He says, when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, which is another route. This is not in Asia. This would have been a route to the east. So this is a different route. But the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So Paul's got a plan. And somehow or another, the Spirit of the Lord prevents Paul from going to where he wants to go. To, by the way, spread the good news of Jesus. And then Paul's like, all right, plan A doesn't work. Let's go to plan B. Let's go east. Nope. Spirit of Jesus says you're not going there either. Again, we don't know why. Then it says, so they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. And during the night, Paul had a vision of a man in Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready. Luke, who wrote Acts, was a companion, a traveling companion of Paul's. He was an eyewitness to these events. After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had preached us to call the gospel to them. Now, Macedonia was across the Aegean Sea from Troas. Macedonia, coincidentally or not, ended up being the location of several of the most important and prominent churches that Paul planted. The book of Ephesians, written to the church in Ephesus. Ephesus is a Macedonian city. The book of Philippians, written to the church in Philippi, Macedonian city. Eventually, Paul travels all the way around Corinth, Colossians, all Macedonian cities. Eventually, Paul makes his way all the way down to Athens, Greece, and preaches to the men in Athens, the philosophers. We don't know why, but we know that God didn't want Paul where Paul wanted to go. And understand that where Paul wanted to go would have been good. He was going on a missionary journey. But what's critical to understand about this journey and so much of our lives is that our plans may be good, but God's plans are always right. Our plans may be good. Paul's plans were good plans. The plans you have for your life, the plans I have for my life, well, the ones that exist. The plans that I have for City North, the dreams, they're good plans. But it doesn't mean they're the right plans. And so often in my life, anecdotally, I look back and I go, well, I've got this plan, I've got this thing, but the fact that I have a plan and the fact that it might be a good plan doesn't mean it's right. And time after time, moment after moment, season after season, I find myself in these positions where it's like God's going, I can't let you do that. Because that's not where you need to be. And you don't even know you need to be there yet, but you need to be there. And so I'm going to shut this door, and I'm going to shut this door, and I'm going to shut this door, and I'm going to shut this door. And when you're in the midst of it, it's not encouraging. When you're in the midst of it, it can be downright defeating. Well, but God, you're leading me. You asked me to be a missionary and to spread the gospel to the world, and so I'm just trying to take the next step in that journey. I'm going to the next region that needs to know about you, and you're telling me to go beyond that and go across the Aegean Sea, and listen, I know what I'm up to. Well, God, you led us down this road, and you brought this pastor to us. You brought this church to us. We didn't ask for it. We didn't pursue it. You brought it. You ironed every step along the way. Multiple people on our team saying, God's leading us, God's leading us, God's leading us. So why'd you lead us right into a dead end? About a week and a half after I had that phone call, I got another phone call, or I got a text, I don't remember, from the secretary of the church that we rent this building from. And the text just said, hey, would you have some time to meet with our lead pastor and our executive pastor on December 9th or something. Now, you need to understand that pastors don't meet in December. It's too busy. There's too much stuff going on. It's Christmas time. I have time to meet. So the fact that I get this message, I'm like, well, that's curious. And so I go and I sit down with them and they say, hey, listen, the plans that we had for 250 Rainbow, for right now, we can't pursue them. So would you guys be interested in re-upping your lease? I'm like, where do I sign the paper? Right now. Do you have it? Do you have the right now? No, I played it cool. I was like, no. It's like, yes, And I told them a bit of the story, and I said, guys, you got to understand that a week and a half ago, I was just beside myself. I didn't know where we were going to go. I could not make sense of what God was possibly trying to do. As I've reflected on that moment now, in retrospect, what I think I understand is that God knew that if we didn't have this one thing that we thought he was leading us to all the way along, we probably would have already come to an agreement with someone somewhere else. We almost certainly would not have still been in a position where we could walk back and say, yeah, we'll re-up. And so I think what God did in that season was he led us down a 5-month rabbit hole that in the end was frustrating to me, but A, it was an opportunity for him to remind me, I've got this. And B, it was an opportunity for him to say, you don't know you need to pause, but I know what's coming down the pike. And this way you don't have to move, you don't have to change anything. So just wait. But I wouldn't have waited. And our board wouldn't have waited. We'd have been moving. We'd have been trying to get things done because it was scary being in a position where we didn't know what our future looked like. And so God went, fine, I'll take care of it. I'll send you a thing that's going to end in disaster so I can remind you that I've got it. God's plans are always right. The implications of this for our church in this season are massive. Where are we going? I don't know. When are we going? I don't know. So Andrew, you're saying that we're trying to raise $250,000 for I don't know? Yep, that's what I'm saying. Good plan, huh? Great plan. The truth is I don't know where and I don't know when. All I know is that God has put us in a position in this season where we are very, very aware that let's say tomorrow God were to just give us a piece of land, do something crazy. We wouldn't have the money right now to build on it. Now, don't get me wrong, like we're in good shape financially, but we wouldn't have the money to move on it in the way that we need to. Let's say that God were to do something even crazier and give us a church building, which, by the way, he's been known to do those kind of crazy things from time to time. Let's say he did that. Right now, we could renovate it probably, but it would strap us financially. So why are we trying to raise $250,000? Because we have learned through this process that we are in a position where we are positioned well for the situation that we are in today. What we are not positioned well for is for God to bring us a miracle and for us to seize on that miracle. We're just not positioned well for it. We're not positioned badly, but we're not positioned well. And so that's what this journey is. I believe that what God did in that season was push the pause button so that we would have the time to pursue this, so that then whatever miracle God has down the road will be ready. Because God in his sovereignty and in his timing is good and is faithful and does these kind of things all the time. So where are we going? I don't know. I know that God called me to Sunbury. I know that I shared part of that story last week. Like, I know that City North is called to the Sunbury, Galena, the Big Walnut School District. I know that. And God would have to send a comet out of the sky with a message on it, like with words, for me to leave Sunbury, okay? Now, he can do that, and if he does, we're going to move. But it would take that level of a sign for me to be like, okay, because it took so much for him to get it through to me to come here in the first place. So where? I don't know, Sunbury, Galena, the Big Walnut area. I think that's where we're called. I'm confident that's where we're called. When? Yeah. When God says. When God provides. When God opens doors that I can't open. Ultimately, I think that's kind of the litmus test for all of us in our lives. How do we, when we're trying to follow what God wants and when he wants, the Bible talks about how the word of the Lord is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path, and we like that idea until we think about the fact that a lamp and a light in that context would have lit up about a step, maybe a step and a half, and that's it. He's going to give us a step when we need to take it. And this is a principle all throughout the Bible. Again, I think about in the book of Numbers, this is something God has always been trying to get through to his people. There's this moment, I preached from this, actually, after we got the news in 2023, I preached a message series in February when I announced to our church that we were going to have to leave. I preached from this, and I use the same thing because I think it's true. In Numbers chapter 19, there's this moment where Israel has built this tent, this special tent. They called it the tent of meeting or the tabernacle. It was the place where they believed the presence of God would descend from heaven and dwell with them. And they're going, okay, so God's leading us now. Like God's coming down to us, and he's leading us. And the way that God did that was through a cloud and through fire. We find the details in Numbers chapter 19. It says, on the day the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant law, was set up, the cloud covered it. The cloud, Israel believed this was the presence of God. It was God himself. From evening until morning, the cloud above the tabernacle looked like fire. So during the day, it looks like fire. And this is how it continued to be. The cloud covered it, and at night, it looked like fire. Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tent, the Israelites set out. Wherever the cloud settled, the Israelites encamped. At the Lord's command, the Israelites set out, and at his command, they encamped. As long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle, they remained in camp. And when the cloud remained over the tabernacle a long time, the Israelites obeyed the Lord's order and did not set out. Sometimes the cloud was over the tabernacle a few days. At the Lord's command, they would encamp. And then at his command, they would set out. Sometimes the cloud stayed only from evening till morning, and when it lifted in the morning, they set out. Whether by day or by night, whenever the cloud lifted, they set out. Whether the cloud stayed, it's funny. Like at this point, I'm like, okay, yep, got it. I've got a couple kids who like to take like a really, really long time to get the details out of their stories. You know what I mean? Like, okay, let's spit it out here. Because I feel like that's what, like you've said it. Okay, we got it. But he keeps going. Whether the cloud stayed over the tabernacle for 2 days or a month or a year, the Israelites would remain in camp and not set out. But when it lifted, they would set out. At the Lord's command, they encamped. And at the Lord's command, they set out. They obeyed the Lord's order in accordance with his command through Moses. When are we going? Where are we going? We're going to go when the Lord leads, and we're going to go where the Lord leads. And I have no answers beyond that. We are going to go when God moves. We are going to do exactly what Israel did. When God moves, we go. Where God moves, we go. We go where God moves, when God moves. For some of us that are planners, that's like, oh, well, can we like have a bit more of a plan than that? Well, that doesn't mean we're going to be inactive. It doesn't mean we're not going to do anything in the meantime. That's what the Go campaign is all about. It's preparation. There's some other things that we're going to be discussing as a board as we get through the season. I mean, all of our energy has been focused on just getting here. But on the back end of this, we're going to discuss some other things. One of my ideas, you ready for one of my ideas? You're going to love it. I want to write a letter. This time to farmers. Okay? I'm not joking at all. I want to write a letter to farmers. To every person, every farmer in the Big Walnut Local School District, and say, hey, houses are coming. If you've got any land that you'd be interested in offloading to a church that is committed to making much of Jesus in this city, we'd love to have a talk. Because here's what I know. All it takes is one farmer that believes in the Lord and who's listened to the Lord for God to be like, hey, why don't you give them something? So like, I'm not going to go like knock on their doors. That'd be creepy. But I'll send them a letter. Because if they don't know we have a need, then how can God tell them we have it? I mean, he can, don't get me wrong, but like, let's just make it easy to make the connection. So we're going to do some crazy stuff like that, and maybe nothing comes of it. What I'm saying is we're not just going to sit on our haunches and do nothing. We're going to still work. We're going to still prepare. We're going to still try things. But at the end of the day, what we're not going to do is go force a thing that God isn't leading us into. We're not going to operate from a place of fear of, well, what if? I mean, like, look, at the end of the day, guys, listen. You heard Dave and Amy's story. I love the music. I love the lights. I like all this stuff. But at the end of the day, if we had to just go buy a giant tent and meet in a field for a while, we'd be all right. Because the presence of God isn't confined to a building with wood studs or metal ones for that matter. And what God has done in and through City North the last 8 years has not happened because of a building we've met in. It's happened because of the people that sit in this room right now. And we can take that wherever we want, whenever we want. Just like Israel watched for the cloud, and when the cloud moved, they moved, and when the cloud stayed, they stayed, so too can we. And if God's next chapter for us is a tent in a field, then we'll meet in a tent in a field. I mean, I'd prefer it not be that, just to be clear, okay? But if that's what the Lord has, then we'll do it. Because wherever he goes and whenever he goes, it will be right. It might not be what we want in that moment. It might not be what makes sense to us in that moment, but it will be what we need in that moment. And so while I can't give you any more specificity than that, what I can do is promise you that no matter when and no matter where, we will follow the leading of the Lord. When he camps, we will camp, and when he moves, we will move. As I reflect on the journey through 2023 and that whole process with that pastor and that church, it would be hard to put into words how devastated I was and how fearful I was. But what God was doing then that I could not see until now is that he bought us time here where we already had peace and we had stability. He brought us an opportunity to do this campaign. It's often God leads us down a road that we think will end somewhere, but what we find in the end is that it leads somewhere different than what we imagined. And so while I don't know where, and while I don't know when, what I do know is that as long as the Lord allows us to be here at 250 Rainbow, we'll be here, and we'll keep helping people find life in Jesus. And if the Lord leads us away from here, we will continue to help people find life in Jesus. If the Lord leads us to a field with a tent, we will keep helping people find life in Jesus. If the Lord gives us a building, we'll renovate that sucker, and we'll keep helping people find life in Jesus. While there are many unknowns, what I know is that no matter where we go, and no matter what we do, no matter where we go, no matter when we go there, what we will do is exactly what God has always asked. Lead people to me. Lead people to me. Lead people to me. The wheres and the whens we will figure out as God moves, because when he moves, we will move. When he stops, we will stop. When he provides, we will receive. We will follow him. And in the middle of it, no matter where we are, no matter when we are, we will keep leading people into life in Jesus. Let's pray. Father, I'm grateful today for your provision. I'm grateful today for your leading. I'm grateful today that so many moments along the way when what you led us to made absolutely no sense to me, I'm grateful that it was exactly what we needed. And so, Father, I pray for our church today, that all of us in our individual personal lives, I ask that you would remind us that you are sovereign, that you are in control. As we sang about today, that you work all things for our good. And so, Father, the circumstances in our lives, the situations that we face, the things that don't make sense to us, Father, I pray that you would remind us that even in the moments when nothing makes sense to us, you are working for our good. Father, for those of us that are in seasons where things have not made sense for a long time and where we are confused and where we are struggling to keep putting one foot in front of the next, Father, I pray that you would send us encouragement as you did to my soul this week. And Father, for our church family as a whole, as we walk down the road that you've asked us to walk down in these few weeks, in the coming months, and over the next 3 years, Father, I pray that you would write a story that only you could write. I ask that you would do things that we can't take credit for. Father, I ask that as I have always asked, I ask that the story of City North Church would not be one of the strategic brilliance of its leaders, but it would be about the miraculous provision of a good and faithful God. And so, Father, as we have already taken steps of faith, the board, the directional team, myself, as we have stepped out and cast this crazy vision to our church, I ask that you would begin to bless that even now, that you would begin to encourage all of us and remind us that you are in control, that you are sovereign, and that when you lead us somewhere, you will not fail us there. That when we humbly seek after and follow you, you are faithful to provide for all that we need. And Father, in the end, on October the 6th, a couple weeks after, as we reveal some things to our church family, and in the coming 3 years, Father, would you write a story that we cannot possibly take any credit for at all? You are good, you are faithful, we trust in you. It's in your name we pray.